Okay. So first thing I want to do is welcome you here. This workshop is about specific strategies for excelling in virtual and group interviews. This workshop isn't going to go too much into the traditional interview information, like how to prepare, common questions, and things you can do after the interview. We do have a separate acing the interview workshop that covers all those topics, just so you're aware. I don't believe it will be offered again until January, but if you're interested in it, I just want to make sure you understand that it is there. Just a quick note about myself. My name is Carolyn Darren. I am a career counselor here at LA City College, and I also do general counseling. So I'll talk a little bit more about the services that we offer in the Career Center also towards the end. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about today are the different types of interviews that you're likely to encounter, just to kind of briefly touch on them. The first one I want to talk about is a phone interview. And so if somebody contacts you and asks to set up a phone interview, just be aware that this is probably not the quote unquote real interview that you're doing in order to get the job. If somebody calls you to set up a phone interview, what they're basically doing is verifying the experiences that you've written on your application or on your resume. So if you do schedule one of these, it's a great idea to have your resume handy in front of you and to also kind of like glance through it before the meeting starts, just to refresh your memory. The person on the other end of the phone is likely to just want to verify job titles that you've had, the names of the companies that you worked for, and the dates that you worked there. But they also might ask you some more information, like, tell me more about your experiences working as like a student ambassador in the Welcome Center, for instance. So you do kind of want to be prepared, because it could be kind of like an interview, but it's basically a screening device to see if you're going to go on to the next round. So the one-on-one and the panel interview are both very similar. One-on-one is just what it sounds like. It's you interviewing with one other person who's asking you questions. And the panel is similar, whereas it's you as the candidate, but then you have more than one person interviewing you. And again, I do talk about those in our regular interviewing workshop. Now, the group interview, these are very common for entry-level positions. They're very common in industries like retail or hospitality. And this is where you have multiple candidates being interviewed at once. And so you might have one person conducting the interview, it might be more than one, but the kind of twist with this is it's not just you answering the questions, it might be just you and one other candidate, but it might be a larger group of 5 or 6 other candidates. And so you have to strategize so you can kind of like look like a team player, so you can come across as being assertive, and ideally that you can like play off of what the other candidates are saying. And we'll talk about that in a bit. And then virtual is the last interview type. And again, we're going to spend extensive time talking about that today. This is basically an interview that you do over the computer, like on Zoom, like we're doing this workshop. Okay. So we're going to start out by focusing on specific tips that you need to keep in mind to do really well in a virtual interview. Okay, so the first thing I want you to think about for like a regular job interview, you basically show up at the company you're going to work for. So you don't need to think about like what's behind you on like the wall or whatever people can see behind you in a virtual window. But for a virtual interview, you do need to think about that. Ideally, you want your background to be not distracting. So you don't want to, even if it looks nice, you don't want to necessarily be sitting in front of a wall of family photos, because the person interviewing you kind of can't help but be distracted by that. You don't want to, for instance, I've had counseling appointments, and counseling appointments are not interviews. So I'm not criticizing, but I have had virtual meetings with people when they're sitting in their kitchen and there's like shelves of food behind them. And hey, that's totally fine for an informal meeting for counseling, but for an interview, again, you don't want something that looks cluttered or distracting. So you do want to either you could use a virtual background if you are confident that it will work well and that you're well lit, so your skin or your teeth are not like battling for the background. Like I've seen people use virtual backgrounds that are blue, and every time they talk, their teeth turn blue because the computer thinks their teeth are part of the background. So you want to test that and make sure it's not going to happen. Or you just move or take things off the wall behind you to a place that it looks neat and not distracting. Also, you want to pull up whatever software you're going to be using and open the window as if you were actually doing the interview. And you really want to pay attention to lighting as well. Again, if you're used to sitting on the couch in front of a window when you're online, that's not going to show the employer a good look at your face, because if there's a lot of light behind you, you will be in shadow. And you do want to make it clear, make it easy for the employer to see you. If there's like a ton of light coming from one direction and it's creating a shadow, you're just going to need to play around with that stuff until it looks good. Because again, you want them to have a clear view of your face and you don't want it to be distracting. Barricade for pets, housemates, and the doorbell. So we all know that, like, again, obviously more and more of us are doing more from our homes these days than we used to. And so whenever I'm doing an important interview or phone call on the computer, I will put a note on my door, because you just know that that's going to be the day that the UPS man rings the doorbell because you have a package and it's going to distract you. I have heard stories, or a story of somebody who interviewed somebody virtually, and the person had a cat walking around on the furniture behind them the whole interview. That is like really fun if that happens during a class, you know, but again, for an interview, it just doesn't look super professional, obviously. And it can, again, be distracting for the person interviewing you. I'm just going to be honest and tell you, when I heard that story, I thought it was kind of charming, but I asked the person, hey, did the person get a job offer? And it was no. And it seemed like part of the reason is because of that cat. You know, let your housemates know not to disturb you during the time that you're in the interview, because again, like, you know, there's a lot of people that might be home with you. You don't want them walking behind you to leave the room, or you don't want a child coming in and asking you what they can eat for a snack, you know, so just make sure you're not going to be bothered. And then this last one, you want to turn off not just your actual physical cell phone, but a lot of us have notification sounds that go off on our computer. And so that could be like, if you use iMessage, I know a lot of us have those texts pushed to our computer and it makes a dinging noise. And so not only is it distracting if you're seeing a bunch of texts come in, but your interviewer is also hearing that notification, and that's going to be distracting. So also the same with your email notification, you want to turn that off. I'm sure you've been in meetings with people where that chime is constantly going off. And again, that is just going to distract you and maybe put you off of your best game. And again, the employer may not like it. So that's something else to think about. There's so much to think about, right? With the background, there's even more. So some of these things we've already talked about, but some other sounds I want you to think about. Pets. So I've got a dog. She will bark if people are walking by. So I put her in the yard or in a spare bedroom, you know, so that doesn't happen. Toilet. Again, I know you're not going to be doing the interview from the restroom, but this is a true story I got from a colleague. They were interviewing somebody and all of a sudden they could hear the sound of a toilet flushing. And I'm sure it wasn't the person in the interview. It was probably a housemate. And you know that for me, when I'm at home, I'm not very far from a bathroom where my home office is. So I always tell people, do not flush the toilet for the next half hour. You could put a sign, but again, you don't want those little things kind of throwing you off your game or not presenting you in your best light. Okay, this last bullet point on this screen, to practice looking in the camera. If you were a student when the pandemic started and all of your classes suddenly went online and all of your professors had to like learn to teach online, you probably got sick of hearing them say, gosh, this is so weird. This is so awkward. I'm not used to looking at a computer when I teach. It is weird to look at a camera and not at the screen, at the person you're conferencing with when you're talking or when you're presenting. It doesn't come natural at all. And so if you really aren't used to that, or if you tend to like look at the person on the screen, like I'm doing that right now, that's gonna make it look like to your viewer that you're not looking at them, like you're looking down. Right now I'm looking at my camera. And so I can't see you guys, the participants, very well, All I see is this black bar with a green light next to it. And that is a very weird thing to get used to talking to. So I would suggest, if you're not used to that, just to give it a few run throughs so you don't feel super awkward. And you can be reassured, like if you're conferencing with somebody you know for practice, they'll tell you, yes, you're looking at me right now, versus no, you're not looking at me. Have them give you that feedback so you know you're coming across well. Okay, looking the part. So dressing professionally, I know you've all heard the advice that even if you're home, you should dress head to toe in business attire. You can do that. Like for some people, that will put them more in the mindset, to like they're interviewing now and they have their dress shoes on and their dress socks and everything. And if that's you, nothing wrong with it. I would say, at the very least, from the top up, look professional, like this woman does in the photo. She's got a blazer and kind of a neutral shirt. But you can see she's wearing jeans, like we can see that. The Zoom person interviewer would not see it. But just make sure you're wearing something on your bottom half that looks like acceptable in case you have to get up really fast. And you just never know when that's going to happen. Maybe you put a sign out to not ring the doorbell and the delivery person is in a rush and they don't know and they're knocking because they need a signature. You're gonna need to get up and deal with that if that happens. Once, I'm gonna tell you, this is a true story that did happen to me. I had an interview set up for a certain time. I think it was like 10:30. So it was kind of a mid-morning. So I didn't have to do it right in the morning when I got up or first thing. I had time to do other things, but then I knew I did have time right before the interview to kind of like review my answers and get ready. I did all of that. And then I still had like an extra 10 or 15 minutes. And I didn't want to just be sitting waiting because I knew I'd get nervous. So I set a timer on my phone for like 2 minutes before the interview was supposed to start, so I could go do other things and not think about it. Well, what I did wrong is I put the wrong hour because I was nervous and going fast. So the timer never went off. I joined the interview at the right time anyway, but during the interview, my timer went off and it was on a piece of furniture that wasn't within my reach. So I had to get up and deal with the timer going off on my phone. Thank goodness I wasn't wearing like work pants, but I was wearing black leggings or black sweats. And so again, like in a quick glance with me popping up, I wasn't in my underwear. I wasn't in like shorts, so dress. So like, again, if you had to stand up real quick, it looks like you're wearing something appropriate. This last one, be mindful of posture and body language. Don't do an interview from the couch. Don't do an interview from your bed, like propped up against the headboard. It really does affect the way that you're sitting and people can tell. You do want to be sitting in like a comfortable chair, just like you would be for a job interview. And you want to be mindful of your posture. Like if you're at home, my home office is actually a dining room table. And so I'm not going to like sit back in a chair like I would maybe at the dinner table, like when I'm discussing something, right? Even though I'm sitting at my dinner table, I have to be mindful, sit up, lean forward slightly. This is another tip. And I think this is a really brilliant one. I actually got this when I was preparing for a virtual interview and looking for tips for this workshop. This one career coach on YouTube, she said, like, how when you join a Zoom, you get that message, like the host will let you in shortly if they haven't started the meeting. And so you get the message and you're kind of just sitting there like this maybe, right? Just kind of sitting there. And then you see that light go on, like they're letting you into the room. I know for most of us, like when you're starting a class or a meeting, you probably still just kind of sit there and wait for someone to address you. But you have to remember, for a Zoom interview, when that light goes on their end, that is their first impression of you. So even though it's going to feel super awkward, when you see that light go on or when you're entering that meeting, you want to be smiling as if you were meeting them for the first time in real life. So if I see that light go on, I'm like this. And yeah, it feels awkward, but then the first thing they see is you smiling and looking engaged versus you just kind of being neutral and like turned off, so to speak, because they haven't addressed you yet. Okay. Technology considerations. So some of this I've already talked about. So I've talked about speaking into the camera, the googly eyes trick. So another career counselor told me this one. I thought it was very cute. If you struggle to look into the camera, she said, put a pair of googly eyes up by your laptop or tablet camera, or just a sticky note that says, look here, just if it helps you. Test the software in advance, even if it's Zoom and you've used it a million times, maybe you're not used to like, actually having to speak during the meeting extensively. So again, you want to practice and make sure that you've downloaded it correctly, that you know how to open it, that you don't have to do an update or something like right before the interview, right? You want to make sure that's all set aside. And then practice with different gallery views. So I know that you've probably seen that, of course, I'm most familiar with Zoom, but sometimes how if you're having a meeting with other people, everybody just goes into like a strip of pictures at the top of the screen or on the side. And other times, like if there's a main speaker, they'll be larger on the screen. I just want to tell you, this happened to me once. I had a virtual interview and I had thought it was in the view where everybody has as like a small square. But what happened is it was set on the speaker view, I think. So the person that was running the meeting, he had this huge face like on my Zoom the whole time during the interview. And it really threw me off, partly because like he just didn't have the friendliest expression on his face. Like I did kind of know him a little bit, and it wasn't like he was being grumpy. It's just that, some people don't like have an especially warm demeanor. And so during the whole interview, I had this guy's face, like just kind of very serious looking at me. And honestly, I feel like it threw me off. Because also, like we don't normally talk with somebody with like a stranger with their face, like just maybe 2 feet away from yours, like my laptop is right now. And honestly, like your brain processes this as a person. So I guess I'm going in a long-winded example here, but my advice is to make sure you can quickly change the gallery view if you don't like the way it looks, or that you set it up in advance with the view you would like. Just a little tip. Okay, so now we're gonna move on and talk about group interview strategies. So again, this is when more than one candidate is being interviewed at the same time. Okay, so a good tip for these types of interviews, the interview, quote unquote, may start before any questions are asked. So in this picture here, you can see that there's these 5 candidates and they're all just kind of sitting in a waiting area. And, this one guy's looking at his notes. A couple people are looking at their phones or on their phones. What you want to be aware of is the person who's like, let's say there's a receptionist here. He or she may be kind of keeping an eye on things and seeing like how people act when they think no one is watching. Like if one person is kind of standoffish and not engaging with the group, they might make note of that. If one person is like trying to make small talk with the other people, that would be a good sign, and they may take note of that. On the other hand, the people who are hiring may actually be observing at this point to see who are the people who seem the friendliest, who are willing to talk to strangers. Because again, depending on the job you're hiring for, those may be characteristics thereafter. Another tip, and I might touch on this again later, if you are kind of in a communal holding area, like in this photo, it really can benefit you to talk to your fellow candidates. And I'm not saying necessarily everybody, because I mean, you're going to be nervous and I don't want to overwhelm you. But if you could talk to 1 or 2 people and try to actually remember their names when they introduce themselves, like try to link something about their the way they look to their name. And that could be very unique. Like let's say this young woman on the phone, second from the right, maybe her name is Laura. I'm just making this up. And, she has long hair. And so the Laura and the long hair start with the same letter. So that's like a little, you could play a game like that with yourself to try to link their name so you can remember it. But the reason you want to learn 1 or 2 people's names, and maybe even like if you're making small talk with them, you can bring up that person's name as well as something that you talked about before the interview started during the interview. And again, that shows you to be somebody who can talk to other people and who can converse intelligently, like in the moment. I will go into that more a little bit later. Oh, actually, it's on the very next slide here. So Ways you can use the group to your advantage. Again, being in a group of candidates can be more intimidating because now not only do you have to worry about like what you're going to say and how you can stand out in a positive way, but now you have to worry about standing out in a crowd. Again, you want to strive to come across as assertive. So that would be like not passive, where you're the person who only speaks when you're spoken to, or who comes across as kind of quiet and not engaged with the group. You don't want that. You don't want aggressive. You don't want to be the person that's dominating the conversation and always being the first one to speak and maybe even interrupting others. You don't want that. You want right in the middle, where like sometimes you let other candidates be the first ones to speak, but at least once, even if you're quiet and shy and this like really requires you to push yourself quite hard, at least once you want to be the first person to answer a question. Another thing you can do to stand out as assertive kind of like goes back to the prior slide when I was saying you want to make conversation to maybe just learn things about people. Hey, are you in school? Where are you going to school? What are you studying? Is this your first job you're interviewing for? Those types of things, because you might gain some information you can use later. So let's say Laura, the young woman who was sitting next to you, you're like, hey, have you ever, is this your first job interview? And she says something like, oh no, I used to work at Starbucks like last year, but I quit because I needed to dedicate more time to school. You say, oh, where did you go? Where do you go to school? Oh, I go to LA City College. I'm studying business. Oh, great. Why would you want to open your own business one day? And she's like, yeah, I would love to open my own coffee shop one day. Okay, let's just say that. And then they call you in. Well, maybe in the interview, I'm going to see what's next here. Maybe in the interview, it comes up where they're talking about customer service or food service. And you could say something like, well, I have experience in food service, as I know one of my fellow panelists, Laura, also used to work at a coffee shop, but my experience is. So something to just like, again, show connection to your co-interviewees. Again, it really does show that you can like engage with people and think in the moment. I've already mentioned the second bullet point here. Another tip I want to give you, if you are in a group interview, it's really important that you treat the interview as a long conversation. And so again, that means if a fellow panelist says something that you were going to say, or very similar to what you were going to say, it's okay to acknowledge that. It's okay to say, like if they're asking you, what do you think are the best top 3 strengths for somebody working with the public? And maybe you're the third or fourth one to answer. If Andy at the end took your answer, we don't want to be like, well, Andy took my answer. You want to say, I agree with Andy's Andy's choices that like patience, cheerfulness, and kindness or whatever are really good traits. Here's why I think they're important, or here's how I demonstrate them in the workplace. So again, like that's if someone takes your answer, but again, you could use something someone says to springboard the conversation. Like if Andy gave the answers of like patience, cheerfulness, and kindness, you could say, I agree with Andy's 3 points. I think another really important one is. So again, like rather than feeling like you're competing with everybody to get the right answer or to say the right thing first, if somebody else really does take your point of view, there are ways that you can, again, turn it into a conversation and add something to the conversation. Okay, so I just kind of went over this, but what can you do if another candidate takes your answer? Does one of you want to just tell me your idea? No, okay. So again, if this happens, and we've all been in situations where this happens, I think most likely it's in classrooms that you've experienced this. But don't despair, don't start freaking out and like, oh, I have to think of something totally different now. They took my answer. You can, again, it would be ideal if you could think of something to add to what they said. But again, you could rephrase it and just say it in the way you were going to say it, or add something that they didn't say. So that's a really good thing that you can do. Okay, so now we're going back to more general interviewing strategies. No matter what the format of your interview, whether it's one of those traditional one-on-ones, virtual, or a panel or a group, you really want to send a thank you text or email. I know that it's becoming more common for recruiters just to give you their number. And so if you wanted to text them, that's fine, but you want to do it within 24 hours. What you want to do is, well, the purpose of this is partly it just puts you in their mind a little bit more than if you forget to send the thank you follow up. It allows you to remind them about why you're a good fit for their position or for their company. The third thing it can do is if you forgot to add something that you think could help your case to get a job there, you could add it. And so your thank you email might be something like, dear Sarah, I want to thank you again for taking the opportunity to interview me, or I want to thank you again for interviewing me today for the position, let's say for the accounting position at Target Incorporated. You could say, as the job description requires or requests, I have 3 years of experience doing this. I also have, you could list a couple other experiences. And if you left something out, you could say, I also realized that I forgot to mention during the interview, blah, blah, blah. And then you just have a polite sign off. I hope to hear from you soon. Or if I can answer any more of your questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. Polite sign off, and then just a thank you. And you could, of course, include your phone number so it's easy for that person to reach you if they wish to by phone. So that's something you do no matter what. Okay, so that's basically the specific tips we have to offer you for virtual and group interview success. Like I had said at the beginning of the workshop, I think some people joined a little late. We also offer about a 50-minute workshop in just general interview strategy. I think the next time we're offering it will be sometime in January. So you can keep an eye on either our Career Center workshop page, which there's a QR code there for you, or our Instagram account. We do post like our monthly schedule of workshops. And we try to post daily reminders about, like in our stories, about our current day workshops. If you want to practice your interviewing skills, you can make an appointment with one of us counselors. The easiest way is probably by calling that number, or you can also email us. I'm going to put my email address in the comments. Let me stop recording real quick.